Germany, April 7, 1945. The spring of 1945 did not arrive in Europe. It was stillborn, smothered by the stench of a continent in its final agonizing convulsion. The air, which should have carried the scent of wet earth and new life, was thick with the miasma of damp plaster, cold cordite, and a pervasive, ancient rot. The thousand-year Reich was collapsing inward, a structure consumed by a fire it had lit itself. This was the Götterdämmerung, not a mythic opera, but a grim, bureaucratic, and bloody disintegration. The Western Front, once a fortress, had ceased to exist as a coherent line. It was now a tattered map of fanatical holdouts, bypassed garrisons, and roving bands of the desperate and the damned. The Wehrmacht was a ghost, replaced by the terrified old men of the Volkssturm and the feral children of the Hitlerjugend. The true war was over. This was merely the killing. Into this heart of darkness, the 33rd Armored Regiment, part of the American Spearhead, pushed relentlessly east. They were no longer green liberators. They were weary, grease-stained executioners. Their only mission to reach the Elbe, end the slaughter, and go home. Their advance was a mechanical crawl, slowed not by strategic resistance, but by the sheer totality of the destruction. Every bridge was a tangle of steel in a muddy river. Every road was a minefield. Every town was a hollow-eyed skull. Somewhere in the labyrinthine hills between Kassel and Paderborn lay the town of Steinfeld. It was, or had been, a place of half-timbered houses and a simple stone church. Now, it was strategically vital for one reason. It was the junction of two highways, an artery the Allies needed to feed their advance, and a choke point the Germans would defend with their last drop of fuel. It was here, in this anonymous graveyard of civilian life, that a single M4 Sherman tank, serial number 30-08144, unofficial name Relentless, was fated to fight its final battle. The engagement itself was a footnote in the day's reports. A brutal, chaotic skirmish that lasted less than an hour. It was a sudden eruption of high-velocity violence that was over almost as soon as it began, leaving Steinfeld erased and the crossroads silenced. When the smoke of the battle finally dissipated, mingling with the low-hanging fog, Relentless remained. It stood alone on the main road, a dark, unmoving silhouette against the backdrop of burning rafters. It was dead. The steel sarcophagus, the tank, a veteran M4A375 that bore the scars of Normandy and the Ardennes on its scarred hide, was frozen in an unnatural posture of defeat. 3 direct hits, all within the span of 30 seconds, had sealed its fate and that of its crew. The first was not a boom, but a deafening metallic clang, an 88mm high-explosive round that struck the running gear. The sound was immediately followed by a violent, sickening lurch that threw the crew against their stations. "Track's gone! Starboard side! We're thrown!" Private John Ross, the driver, screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. The tank slewed hard right and grounded itself, the unspooled track links rattling uselessly against the hull. In an instant, Relentless had gone from a 30-ton hunter to a 30-ton coffin. The second shell struck before the crew could even register the first. It was an armor-piercing round that hit the rear plate. There was no explosion, just a concussive whoomp that pressurized the cabin, followed by the immediate horrifying silence as the right engine died. "Engine's dead! Fire in the bay!" a voice yelled. The automatic extinguishers hissed, filling the compartment with the acrid smell of chemicals, which barely masked the new stench of atomized fuel and superheated oil. Relentless was now cold, dark, and utterly powerless. The third shell was the death sentence. It was a high-velocity tungsten core round that struck the turret ring, the delicate seam where the turret met the hull. The sound was one no tanker ever wanted to hear, a high-pitched screech of tortured metal, followed by a gong, so profound it seemed to vibrate in their bones. The turret, which had been traversing to find the enemy, stopped dead. "Traverse is dead!" Corporal Frank Davis, the gunner, yelled, his hands white-knuckling the useless controls. "It's jammed! Sir, I'm locked solid!" The crew was trapped. To bail out now, under the guns of the unseen enemy, was suicide. All around them, the rest of their platoon, caught in the same ambush, was either burning or retreating. Relentless was alone, a steel sarcophagus, waiting for the final, killing blow. 2 days later, on the morning of April 9th, an infantry patrol from the 29th Infantry Division cautiously advanced to secure the crossroads. The air was still, broken only by the cawing of crows. The soldiers found a scene of terrible, frozen violence. The Sherman stood in the middle of the road, its paint blistered and black. Its 75mm gun was pointed at a fixed angle, a finger of accusation. About 50 yards to the east, half hidden by the collapsed wall of a brick farmhouse, sat its adversary, a German Pisa KPFW-6, a Tiger I. The Tiger was also a wreck. Its formidable 8-ton turret had been completely torn from the hull by a catastrophic internal explosion. It lay upside down in the mud, its long 88mm gun pointing impotently at the sky. The infantry patrol leader, a weary lieutenant, made a note in his log. The later official report was devoid of all emotion. Objective secured. One M4A3 medium tank immobilized and disabled. Damage consistent with heavy armor fire. 3 penetrations. Enemy PZKPW-6 Tiger tank destroyed 50 yards east. Catastrophic internal detonation. Both vehicles out of action. No surviving M4 crew identified. 3 names. 3 fates. Inside the dark, cramped confines of the Sherman, 3 men remained. Their identities were later reconstructed from the meticulous, impersonal rosters of Charlie Company. The initial HE blast that had taken the track had also sent a shower of lethal metal fragments through the co-driver's hatch, killing him instantly. The second hit, in the engine, had done the same to the loader, who had been reaching for a new round. But 3 men, the core of the crew, were still at their stations. Sergeant Raymond Miller, the tank commander. A 28-year-old from Boston, a veteran who had traded a law apprenticeship for a steel helmet. He had seen too much to panic. As the tank died beneath him, his only thought was how to sell their lives for the highest possible price. Corporal Frank Davis, the gunner. A 20-year-old from rural Ohio, a farm boy with an almost preternatural gift for trigonometry and a killer's calm. His world had shrunk to the rubber eyepiece of his gun sight, and he was now blind and powerless, his frustration a cold knot in his stomach. Private First Class John Ross, the driver-mechanic. At 19, he was the youngest, a kid from Detroit who knew engines better than people. He sat clutching the useless steering levers, his knuckles white, trying to control the tremor in his legs. The events that transpired between the third hit and the final, mutual destruction, were pieced together later. A desperate hypothesis formed by G2 investigators. Their last radio transmission, logged at 1842 hours, was from Sergeant Miller. His voice was steady, betraying no fear, only a chilling professionalism. Alpha 3 to control. We are immobilized at the crossroads. Hold in position. Have visual on enemy heavy armor. Out, duel of the doomed. Inside the tank, the air was unbreathable, a cocktail of smoke, cordite, sweat, and fear. "Ross, can you get us moving?" Miller's voice was low. "Negative, Sarge. Engine's gone. Track's gone. We're a pillbox." "Davis?" "Jammed, Sarge. I'm locked solid, facing 11 o'clock. I got nothing." Miller peered through his commander's periscope. The Tiger, arrogant and massive, was still there, half concealed. It had paused, its crew likely believing the Sherman was finished, a burning coffin. After a long, agonizing minute, the German tank's engine roared, and it began to move. It was repositioning, pulling out from behind the wall to get a clear shot at the other American tanks that were falling back. It was a fatal, arrogant mistake. The Tiger, in its hunt, began to creep directly into the fixed, unmoving gun sight of the Relentless. "My God," Davis whispered, his face pressed back to the sight. "Sarge, he's coming. He's coming right into my crosshairs." "Don't fire! Don't you dare fire!" Miller hissed, his voice a thread of steel. "Wait, wait." The German behemoth filled the optic. Davis wasn't using the traverse. He didn't need to. He was gently, fractions of an inch, adjusting the manual elevation wheel. "I have him," Davis said, his voice now utterly calm. "Dead center. Right on the ammo rack." "Send it," Miller ordered. The 75mm gun bucked in its cradle, a deafening roar that filled the tiny compartment. For a fraction of a second, they watched their shell, a tracer of hope, cross the 50-yard gap. It struck the Tiger at the precise, vulnerable joint between its hull and turret. The result was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The lucky shot plunged into the Tiger's main ammunition stowage. A brilliant white flash, and the German tank seemed to inflate. A split second later, a volcano of fire and black smoke erupted from its hull, and the multi-ton turret was launched 20 feet into the air in a slow, obscene pirouette. They didn't even have time to cheer. The German gunner, in his dying instant, had reflexively fired his own weapon. The 88mm shell, a sledgehammer of anti-tank ordnance, struck the Sherman's gun mantelet. The thick armor held. It did not penetrate. But the kinetic force was beyond comprehension. The impact sent a catastrophic wave of spalling through the interior, blasting the inside of the armor plate loose. The compartment was filled with 1,000,000 red-hot, razor-sharp fragments of steel, traveling at supersonic speed. For the 3 men inside, the end was instantaneous. Miller was thrown from his commander's cupola, his last thought a silent, "Got him." Ross slumped forward over his levers, and Corporal Davis remained where he was, his eye socket forever fused to the rubber eyepiece of his gun sight. They had held their position. Life after death. The war moved on, as it always does, sweeping past the debris of Steinfeld. The official divisional records for April 7, 1945, contained the final, bloodless epitaph for the crew of Relentless. Objective Crossroads 4B secured. Enemy heavy armor in sector neutralized. Roadway cleared for advance units. War demands not reverence, but resources. Days later, a maintenance and recovery detachment arrived. The Tiger was unsalvageable, a warning to scavengers. But the Sherman, despite its grievous wounds, was deemed repairable. It was dragged from the crossroads, its one good track leaving a deep scar in the mud, and towed to a rear-area field workshop. The mechanics in these depots called tanks like relentless ghosts. They hated working on them. It was a ghoulish, grim business. They spent 2 days just cleaning it, using steam hoses to clear out what was left of the crew. They had to use chisels to remove a boot lodged in the driver's compartment. The head of the maintenance crew, a master sergeant named Hafner, supervised the refit. He had seen it all. "Get the torch," he ordered, his voice flat. Cut the turret ring loose. We'll need a new one from Ordnance. Patch the hull and get a new engine from that wreck by the river. I want this thing back in the line by the end of the month." The hull was patched with raw steel plates. A new turret was hoisted from a depot and bolted on. A new engine was fitted. Less than a month later, repainted and issued a new serial number, the tank was returned to service. By the time Germany surrendered in May, it was already with a new, superstitious crew, pushing toward the Elbe. The epilogue. The tank survived the war. It served in the occupation forces in Germany, a silent sentinel, before being sold as surplus to the French army in the early 1950s. It served for several more years until, hopelessly obsolete, it was finally decommissioned and sent to a massive military scrapyard near Reims, France. It sat for years, a mountain of rusting green, waiting to be consumed. In 1957, a French mechanic, a veteran of his own war in Indochina, was tasked with disassembling the old Sherman for scrap. He unbolted the heavy driver's hatch, preparing to toss it onto the pile. As he did, something on the inner face caught his eye. It was caked in grime and multiple layers of paint, French blue, American olive drab, and beneath it all, the original factory primer. He took out a rag and wiped away the grease. There, scratched deep into the metal with a knife point, or perhaps a shell fragment, was a message. It was barely legible, a testament hidden for over a decade. 5 words in English, carved in a desperate, uneven hand. "We held the road." No one would ever know who wrote it, or when. Was it Private Ross, in the terrifying moments after the tank was immobilized, a final message to the world? Was it Sergeant Miller, etching a final after-action report as he waited for the end? Or was it, as some later speculated, Master Sergeant Hafner, the mechanic who rebuilt the Ghost, a quiet tribute to the men he had to clean out of it? The truth was lost to time. Today, the Steinfeld Crossroads is gone, absorbed by the quiet efficiency of post-war reconstruction. A peaceful, fertile farm field stretches over the spot. There are no monuments, no plaques. The only remaining trace of that day's battle is a single faded photograph in the archives of the 33rd Armored Regiment. It shows 2 dead Titans, the Sherman and the Tiger, locked in a silent embrace. 2 steel symbols of a war that was ending. 1 life, 1 tank, and 1 crossroads at a time.